here today is Mr. Denis Depoux, Global Managing Director of Roland Berger. Hi, Mr. Depoux. Great pleasure to have you here today. To start with, I learned that you have lived and worked in China for many years. So what changes have you witnessed in China throughout the years?
Indeed, my first time in China was in 1993, and I lived in the Guangdong province for 3 years. Then I moved out and I came back 8 years ago in China. I think the most important change that I've witnessed over these 30 years and the last 8 years is the massive development of infrastructure, which I think is very emblematic of China, thanks to the planned economy and the long-term vision, enabling development by providing this massive infrastructure development. Of course, it's probably less massive today because there's already a lot, and there's not much more that can be done. But I think that's what has impressed me a lot in the last decades.
What do you think of China's commitment in continuing reform and opening up, and what opportunities this present for European businesses?
I think this year is 45 years of so-called market reform and opening. The commitment of China to further open up, to further welcome foreign investment, foreign business, to further integrate China in globalization, which I think is very welcome at a time when obviously there's a lot of protectionist forces ruining globalization everywhere. So I think I do believe this message. I think that's also my observation over the last 8 years, that the market is further and further open, that some of the restrictions that were existing in financial services or in the automotive sector have been gradually removed or are being removed as we speak.
The world has been facing a range of challenges in recent years. How do you see European business adapting to the changing economic landscape, and what role does the Chinese market play?
I think there is a characteristic of European business in China. Most European companies are in China for the Chinese market, and increasingly so. Of course, there are also manufacturing products, equipments, systems in China for the rest of the world. But historically, a lot of European business has been in China to serve the Chinese market. And that works well today because the Chinese market is big and is growing. Its rate of growth is also higher than other markets. If you think even a China at around 5%, that's a commitment for this year, would still be probably 2-, 3-fold, 4-fold what Europe or America will experience this year according to IMF forecast. And that's true of Asia overall. So I believe that European business obviously can still benefit and is well placed. Now, things have changed, indeed. I think China has long been and probably will remain the factory of the world, and there was an old China story based on labor productivity and massive infrastructure development, I was saying before. That is changing. So the new China story is around industrial modernization, is around innovation, is around also a market that is starting to have features that are different from other global markets simply by its scale, and also because it has taken a different direction. Think of payment systems, think of e-commerce, think of the distribution channel structure. And for all these reasons, the Chinese market is singular.
So what suggestions would you give for foreign companies who are looking to expand their business in China?
I would directly relate to the very distinctive features of the Chinese market. I think first recommendation would be around localization. I think it's very important to be grounded, to be rooted in the Chinese market, and not only in the big cities, because the bulk of the Chinese market is actually rather now in tier 3, tier 4 cities. So it needs a local structure. It needs pretty quick decision making, because this is also a market that is changing fast. I think the Chinese consumers are very interested in innovation, very interested in technology, but they adopt or reject very fast. So that's sometimes difficult, but it's also a good way to test and trial and test products and then move on to something else if it doesn't work, or scale up if it does work.
Looking forward, in which area can Europe and China's business enhance their cooperation?
Well, I see three or four sectors. The first is indeed this incredible growth engine that is starting to accelerate. That's industrial modernization, that's automation, robotics, that's digitization of industry. I think, of course, China has both the most modern factories in some fields, think of solar PV or batteries, most productive factories in the world, but they also have, Chinese companies also have some pretty underdeveloped, let's say, automated factories, and that needs to change. So big market going forward. Of course, the energy transition is another big market. So China is at the heart of the energy revolution and is certainly leapfrogging some other countries in that respect, but I think there's still a lot of European and foreign technology and know-how that can be contributed. So energy transition as a second sector. I think the consumer sector obviously is very important. It's changing a lot. I think there is an imperative to grow the middle class and to grow it by the bottom, by bringing maybe 50 to 150 million new people in the middle class, let's say from the periphery of cities, the boundary between the rural world and the suburbs. That's a market maybe with relatively low purchasing power, but massive number of people. So what it tells to foreign brands, foreign companies that sometimes are used to the premium market is that maybe they need to consider a broader scope. So that's a third opportunity. And I would quote a fourth one, which is the whole healthcare environment. That goes from pharmaceutical, but it's also hospitals, it's also elderly care, where I think Europe as a strong safety net and has developed a specific industry, which I think is very fit to the Chinese model, that has, of course, premium segment, but also is in need of the private sector to further penetrate the middle class segment in the healthcare environment. And I think if you look at the pharmaceutical world with the value-based procurement that has been pulling down the price of medicine, I think that's a good example of the direction. The direction is, of course, for people who can afford it to serve the premium market, but the direction is also to make this available to most people, and therefore to invent models. Europe is well fit to provide those models because that's part of the values of the continent.
2023 marks the 10th anniversary of the purpose of Belt and Road Initiative. How do you evaluate the progress of jointly building a green belt and road? And how can foreign firms participate in and benefit from it?
I think there has been in the last couple of years a turning point in the Belt and Road Initiative, acknowledging that maybe not all projects were good to finance, and therefore more caution, more screening and selection was needed. And that was dealing with multiple dimensions, one of them being the climate performance of these projects. Companies are actually now stepping out of coal projects. That's a good example. China is definitely the leader in market share, in solar PV modules, in wind turbines. There's a considerable need for renewable energy investment and therefore equipment in the world. That's particularly true of Asia. Asia needs close to 5 terawatts of renewable energy capacity. That's huge. That's massive. In a comparison, I think for Europe, this figure is 1. So that's 5-fold. It's huge opportunity for Chinese players, not only to provide the equipment, but also to invest directly in these projects, finance them, and therefore accelerate the energy transition. And this is not just for the profitability of the project. This is key for the competitiveness of China and the Chinese manufacturing powerhouse, because increasingly the Chinese manufacturing sector is a regional sector. So there are plants in China, but there are also plants in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, tapping into competitive advantage and know-how of different countries and different industrial clusters. And if these countries are not fast enough on the energy transition, they will lose their market share on manufacturing sites.
What is your outlook for China's economic growth this year? And which sector, in your opinion, will be the key driver?
So far, what we have seen is a soft but steady recovery, and that's also fine if it's sustained and steady. I think soft is not too good, but steady is better. First thing, it has to be driven by domestic consumption. It's not only the consumer consumption; it's also B2B consumption. But it has to be driven domestically, simply because obviously global demand will be slower. Simply because you have Europe, US, anywhere between 0 and 1.5% growth according to IMF this year, and maybe a bit more next year. So it's going to be slow. It means also that the economy needs to be supported domestically.
That's all the questions I have today. Thank you for sharing your insight with us.
Thank you.